The boy sat completely still at the edge of a crowded gymnasium, knees pulled to his chest beneath a folding table decorated with blue streamers, while 40 children shrieked and laughed and chased each other across the polished floor of Riverside Community Center in Oakville, Ontario. His name was written on a paper crown someone had placed on the table in front of him. He hadn't touched it. Around him, the birthday party for his classmate continued without pause, balloons bouncing off the ceiling, a DJ playing songs too loud for a 9-year-old's party, parents standing near the snack table trading weekend plans while their children burned energy in every direction. But the boy under the table wasn't burning anything. He was surviving. His name was Felix, and he had been sitting that way for 11 minutes. His father knew this because he had been watching from across the room, counting, the way parents of children like Felix learn to count. Not obsessively, just carefully, the way you learn to read weather before a storm. His first name was Grant Holloway. He was 43 years old, a structural engineer who spent his days calculating load-bearing capacities and stress tolerances in buildings. He was good at it. He understood how pressure worked, how structures failed, how to design something that could hold weight without collapsing. What he had never quite mastered, in 4 years of doing this alone, was how to apply any of that knowledge to the small person currently hiding under a table at a birthday party in Oakville. Felix was 8. He had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at age 5, 14 months after his mother, Carolyn, died of an aggressive brain tumor that took her from diagnosis to death in less than 7 months. Grant had been 39 when Carolyn died. He had been managing 2 enormous losses simultaneously ever since. The wife he had built his entire adult life around, and the version of fatherhood he had imagined before he understood what Felix actually needed. He loved his son completely. That part was never in question. But love, Grant had learned, was not the same thing as knowing what to do. He stood near the gymnasium wall now with a paper cup of lemonade he hadn't drunk, watching Felix from a careful distance. Not too close. Felix had made it clear, in the wordless but precise way he communicated, that hovered parenting felt like pressure. And pressure made everything worse. So Grant waited, cup in hand, trying to look relaxed in a room that smelled like fruit punch and gym floor cleaner. The birthday party belonged to a boy named Kieran, who was in Felix's class at Maple Ridge Elementary. Kieran's mother had sent the invitation home in Felix's backpack with a handwritten note attached. "Please come, Kieran really wants Felix there." Grant had appreciated the note. He had also spent 3 evenings preparing Felix for the event, showing him photos of the venue, explaining the schedule, practicing what to say when someone handed him cake. They had a word. If Felix said weather, it meant he needed to leave. Felix had not said weather yet, but he was also under a table, so. Grant scanned the room again. He noticed something he hadn't registered before. Near the DJ table, the children had organized themselves into a spontaneous relay race, and the race had absorbed almost every kid in the room. Not intentionally, nobody had stood up and excluded Felix. It had just happened the way those things happen. A few kids ran, then more joined, and the game became physical and fast, and Felix couldn't do fast in a room this loud, and so the group expanded, and Felix's place in it quietly ceased to exist. No cruelty, no intention. Just the ordinary momentum of childhood moving away from him at a pace he couldn't match. Grant set down his lemonade cup on a nearby table. He was calculating. How many more minutes before this crossed from uncomfortable to genuinely distressing? How close was too close? Was this a moment to intervene, or a moment to trust Felix to find his own way through? He had been asking himself these questions for 4 years, and he still did not have reliable answers. He does that at transitions too. The voice came from beside him. A woman had appeared at the same stretch of wall, also holding a cup she wasn't drinking from. She was maybe late 30s, with her hair pulled back practically, wearing the kind of clothes that said she had come straight from somewhere else. Not a weekend outfit, but not quite work clothes either. She was watching the gymnasium with the same particular quality of attention Grant recognized from other parents who had learned to monitor a room without appearing to. "Sorry," Grant said, "the sitting small thing." She nodded toward Felix's table. "The way he pulls in, it's a regulation response. He's trying to reduce sensory input." She said it matter-of-factly without pity, the way someone might identify a cloud formation. "Is he yours?" Grant paused. "Do you work with kids?" "I used to." She took a small sip from her cup. I'm taking some time off. My nephew is Kieran's friend. I'm on aunt duty today. She glanced at Grant briefly. Occupational therapist, pediatric. I worked with sensory processing disorders for about 8 years before I took a step back. Grant looked at her. Why'd you stop? She considered that for a moment. Burnout mostly. I was good at it, which somehow made it harder to put down at the end of the day. A short exhale. I'm Margot. Margot Lane, Grant Holloway. They stood in silence for a moment, which was not uncomfortable. Both of them were watching Felix. He hasn't said the word yet, Grant said mostly to himself. What word? We have a code word. If he says it, we leave no questions. Margot nodded slowly. That's good. That's a really good system. She said it like she meant it, not like a compliment. How long has he been under there? 14 minutes now. He's managing. She tilted her head slightly. He's not escalating. See how his hands are? They're still. If he were heading toward a meltdown, you'd see repetitive movement first. She paused. Sorry, I'm doing it again. Occupational therapist-ing at strangers. No, Grant said. Please don't stop. There was something in his voice when he said it that he hadn't intended to be audible. A specific exhaustion. The kind that lives in people who have been doing something hard alone for a long time, and have gotten competent enough at it that nobody thinks to ask if they're okay. Margot looked at him properly for the first time. She didn't say anything right away. Has he made any friends here? She asked. He likes Kieran. Kieran is patient with him. Grant watched his son shift slightly under the table, repositioning his back against the metal leg. But patient isn't the same as knowing how to reach him. Most kids don't know how. They try and it doesn't land right and they give up, and Felix can see them giving up, which is, he stopped. It's a lot to watch. Margot set her cup down on the windowsill beside her. Do you mind if I try something? Grant looked at her. What kind of something? Low key. I'll sit near him. Just near, not with him yet. I want to see what he's tracking before I try to engage. She met his eyes directly. I'll follow his lead entirely. If he signals he wants me gone, I'll leave. You can watch the whole thing. Grant was quiet for a moment. He was an engineer. He evaluated risk for a living. He thought about Carolyn, who had trusted people before she had full information about them, and had usually been right. He thought about 4 years of standing at gymnasium walls, watching his son disappear into himself at parties and field trips and school concerts and every other event that was designed for children who processed the world in a more typical way. Okay, he said. Margot crossed the gymnasium floor without urgency. She didn't walk toward Felix's table directly. She walked toward the table next to it, where a forgotten pile of craft supplies from an earlier activity sat mostly untouched. Foam stickers, colored cardstock, markers still in their tray. She sat down at that table with her back to Felix, picked up a piece of cardstock, and began doing something with it. Folding, Grant watched. Felix, from under his own table, noticed. Children notice things adults think they're being subtle about. Grant could see his son's head turn slightly in Margot's direction. Not fully, just a degree or two, registering. Margot didn't look at him. She kept folding. After about 2 minutes, she held up what she'd made, a small paper crane, clumsy and slightly asymmetrical, and set it on the edge of the table closest to Felix's hiding spot. Then she picked up another piece of cardstock and started again. Grant's chest did something complicated. Felix watched the crane for a long moment. Then, very slowly, one hand emerged from under the table and touched it. He didn't take it, just touched it, the way he tested most new things. Then the hand withdrew. Margot kept folding, did not comment, did not look. 30 seconds later, Felix's hand came back. He pulled the crane under the table with him. Grant realized he was holding his breath. 2 minutes after that, Felix's head appeared at the side of the table, not underneath anymore, but alongside it, seated on the floor with his back against the table leg, in view. It was a tiny migration. 8 inches, maybe, but it was toward. Margot set another crane on the edge of the table, still without looking. Felix picked it up immediately this time. Is he making those? The voice came from Grant's left. He turned to find Kieran standing beside him, watching Margot and Felix with a child's uncomplicated curiosity. The woman is, Grant said. Felix is collecting them. Kieran considered this for a moment. Then, with the decisive practicality of an 8-year-old who has identified a task worth doing, he walked over to the craft table, sat down across from Margot and said, "Can you show me how?" Margot smiled. "Sure, It's called origami. Felix watched Kieran sit down. His expression did the thing Grant had learned to translate, a rapid, almost invisible recalibration, reassessing the situation. Kieran was known. Kieran was safe category. The woman was still not looking directly at Felix, still not asking anything of him, still just folding. Felix stood up. He moved to the table and sat down in the chair beside Kieran, still holding his clunsum, and watched Margot's hands. Grant pressed his back against the gymnasium wall and looked up at the ceiling for a moment, because he needed somewhere to put what he was feeling. And the ceiling was the least complicated available option. What happened over the next 20 minutes was not dramatic. There was no announcement. Nobody called the room's attention to it. Margot showed Felix the basic fold sequence. Felix, who had an exceptional capacity for precise repeated motion when the pressure was off, caught on quickly, faster than Kieran, actually, which Margot noted aloud in an offhand way. You're a natural at this. Your folds are cleaner than mine already. Felix did not respond verbally, but his posture changed. Slightly taller. The particular quality of stillness in his body shifted from endurance stillness to focus stillness. They are different if you know how to read them. Two other children drifted over from the relay race, drawn by curiosity about what the quieter corner of the room was producing. Within 10 minutes, there were 5 children at the craft table, making increasingly chaotic origami attempts, and Felix was the one they were watching for technique. Not because anyone had assigned him that role. Because he was simply best at it. There was a moment, Grant caught it from across the room, when one of the other children, a girl with braids and an expression of fierce concentration, held up her lopsided crane and said to Felix, "Does mine look right?" And Felix, without looking at her directly, reached over and adjusted one of the folds, and she said, "Oh," and held it up again to check, and said, "That's so much better, thank you." And Felix said nothing. But he made another crane. Grant found to his genuine surprise, that he was crying. Not visibly. Not in a way anyone would notice, the particular kind of crying that happens behind the eyes and stays there. He had spent 4 years trying to engineer inclusion for Felix. Private assessments, therapy programs, social skills groups, carefully worded emails to teachers, practiced conversations before every event. He had read the books. He had attended the workshops. He had modified birthday party preparation into a 3-evening project, and all of it was necessary, and all of it mattered, and none of it had produced this simple, unforced moment of a child being useful to other children in a room where he had, 11 minutes earlier, been hiding under a table. What Margot had done was not complicated. That was the thing. There was no intervention protocol, no framework. She had just sat near him, done something with her hands, put a paper crane where he could reach it, and waited. She had spoken the language of someone who understood that some people need the door left open rather than pushed through. Grant walked across the gymnasium. He sat down at the table, 1 seat away from Felix. Close enough to be present, far enough to not crowd, and picked up a piece of cardstock. "Show me," he said. Felix looked at him, then looked at Margot, who was demonstrating the first fold to the girl with braids. Then looked back at his father. And without a word, Felix took the cardstock from Grant's hand, positioned it correctly, and pressed the first fold down with the flat of his thumb. Grant let him teach. Later, after the cake, Felix had eaten exactly 1 bite of his piece, which was 2 bites more than Grant had expected, and after most of the families had gathered their children and shuffled toward the exits, Grant found Margot near the coat rack pulling on a gray jacket. He didn't know how to begin, so he didn't try to find the perfect opening. He just said, "Thank you, I don't know how to," that was. He stopped, started again. He hasn't been at the table at one of these things before, ever, not once. Margot finished buttoning her jacket. She looked at him steadily. "He's a remarkable kid, the way he processes spatial patterns, that's genuinely unusual." "I know," Grant said, "I know he is, I just..." He paused. "I forget, sometimes, that other people will be able to see that. I get so focused on what's hard for him that he exhaled. I lose track of what isn't." Margot was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask something personal?" she said. "Go ahead. How long have you been doing this alone?" The question hit him in the sternum, not harshly, just precise. 4 years, Grant said. His mother passed when he was 4, brain tumor. He said it the way he always said it, with a kind of careful steadiness that he had built over time like scaffolding. "She would have been very good at this, better than me. You seem pretty good at it. I seem competent, Grant said. There's a difference. Margot looked at him for a long moment. There was no pity in her expression, which he appreciated more than he knew how to say. Just recognition. The way one person who has been carrying something heavy recognizes another. I left my job because I forgot why I started, she said. I was following protocols so carefully I stopped actually seeing the kids. And then one session I looked at this 7-year-old I'd been working with for 8 months and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd just sat with him. Without an outcome in mind. She zipped her jacket. Today was the first time in almost a year I've done anything that felt like what I used to be able to do. Felix appeared at Grant's elbow. He was holding 6 paper cranes in a careful stack, all of them made at the table tonight. He held them out toward Margot. She looked at them, then at Felix. Are these for me? Felix didn't answer. But he pushed them forward another inch. She took them with both hands. Thank you, Felix, I'll keep all of them. Felix looked at his shoes, then at the cranes in Margot's hands. Then he turned and walked toward the gymnasium exit, apparently satisfied. Grant looked at Margot. He's never given anything to a stranger before. She looked down at the cranes in her hands for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. Do you want to get coffee sometime? Grant said. You and maybe bring origami instructions for Felix to work through. He's going to want to learn the next one. Margot laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. That is the most structurally honest invitation I have ever received. I'm an engineer. She smiled. I can tell. They exchanged numbers in the lobby while Felix waited by the door, methodically pressing the automatic door button every 7 seconds to watch it open and close. Grant let him. Some battles were worth having, and some doors were worth opening a few extra times. On the drive home through Oakville's wet November streets, Felix sat in the back seat with his seatbelt on, and his hands in his lap, and watched the streetlights pass. Grant drove and didn't fill the silence, which was something he had learned to do well. After about 10 minutes, Felix said, without preamble, the lady knew about the cranes. Grant glanced in the rear-view mirror. What do you mean? Before I picked one up. Felix paused. She put it close enough that I could. Grant kept his eyes on the road. You noticed that, huh? Yes, Felix was quiet again. Then, she didn't look at me. No, Grant agreed. She didn't. That was the right thing. Grant's hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel. Yeah, buddy, it was. They drove the rest of the way home in the specific comfortable silence that the two of them had built together over 4 years of not always knowing what to say, but staying in the car anyway. When they pulled into the driveway, Felix unbuckled his seatbelt with his usual precision, 3 clicks of preparation before the actual release, and climbed out and went to the front door and waited for Grant to unlock it. Inside, before he went upstairs, Felix stopped at the bottom of the staircase and turned around. I want to learn the next fold, he said. Grant hung up his keys. We'll find it together. Felix considered this. Then he went upstairs. Grant stood in the front hallway of a house that was quiet in the way. Houses with one parent and one child are quiet. Not empty, just compact, all the space accounted for. He thought about Margot. He thought about a paper crane placed at the exact right distance from a child under a table. He thought about Carolyn, who had always said that kindness was really just attention, with direction. And about how many years it had taken him to understand what she meant. He thought about the girl with the braids saying, "Does mine look right?" And Felix reaching over, without a word, and adjusting the fold. He thought about the fact that 40 children had been in that gymnasium tonight, and the one who had showed 3 of them how to make a crane was the one who had spent the first 20 minutes of the party not visible to any of them. He turned off the hallway light. He climbed the stairs. He checked on Felix, who was asleep, with the 6 cranes lined up on his nightstand in a row, ordered by size, the way Felix ordered most things he valued. Grant stood in the doorway for a moment, the way parents stand in doorways, just looking, just accounting for the fact that the person in that bed is still there, still breathing, still safely inside the house that holds them both. Then he went to his own room, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought about what Margot had said on her last day with a child she'd been treating for 8 months. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd just sat with him, without an outcome in mind. He thought about that for a long time. If there is a thing that parents who are doing this right slowly learn, and Grant was still learning it, would probably always be learning it. It is this. The child does not need you to fix the room. The child needs to know that you will stay in the room, that you will put the crane close enough to reach, and not make it a test. That presence is not the same as hovering. That love, in its most useful form, is sometimes just knowing exactly how far away to sit. Felix knew. He had known it from under the table, in the dark, before he had touched anything. He had just been waiting for someone else to figure it out.